Okay, let's dive right into an incredibly powerful concept that secretly shapes our entire society, and that is normalization. In this explainer, we're going to unpack the invisible architecture that governs exactly how we think, how we act, and how we live together. We've got a packed agenda today. We are going to start by opening up the invisible rulebook. Then we'll look at Foucault and disciplinary power, talk about normalizing political ideas, unpack the normalization principle, explore the dignity of risk, and finally look at denormalizing your world. Let's see how society actually decides what's acceptable. So, Section 1, the invisible rulebook, the unseen forces shaping society. Have you ever stopped to wonder why we just accept certain behaviors as everyday reality while instantly, almost instinctively, rejecting others? I mean, it's a fascinating question. Who or what is actually writing the rules of our social reality? Well, sociology defines this process as normalization. It's the social process through which ideas and actions come to be seen as normal and just entirely taken for granted in everyday life. This perfectly explains why we naturally avoid danger, or why it's completely expected for us to grieve a loved one, while at the same time we universally abhor practices like cannibalism. These aren't just biological instincts, they are heavily reinforced social norms. Moving on to Section 2, Foucault and disciplinary power, creating the ideal norm. What is absolutely fascinating here is the profound contrast in how this tool can be used. On one hand, you have the philosopher Michel Foucault, who saw normalization as a mechanism of disciplinary power, basically a way to punish the abnormal and force societal conformity. But, as we're going to see a bit later in this explainer, advocates like Dr. William G. Bronston completely flipped this idea on its head. They used normalization as a tool to uplift marginalized groups and secure human rights. So it's the exact same concept, but with entirely different real-world applications. Foucault argued that institutions operate by establishing what he called an optimal model. Think about Foucault's soldier. The military creates this idealized norm of exactly how a proper soldier should stand, how they should march, present arms, down to the tiniest detail. Then, they use disciplinary power to reward those who conform and punish those who deviate. The brilliance, and honestly, the danger of this, is that it exerts maximum social control with the absolute minimum amount of physical force. People just naturally fall in line. But how do these brand new behaviors actually become an everyday routine? The normalization process theory breaks it down into 4 distinct steps. First up is sense-making, or coherence, where people just try to figure out what the new norm even means. Second is cognitive participation, getting folks mentally engaged and committed to it. Third, collective action, which is actually doing the thing in the real world. And finally, reflexive monitoring, where society evaluates and tweaks the behavior to make sure it really sticks. It's a highly structured social machine. All right, Section 3, normalizing political ideas. How thoughts become everyday reality. See, normalization is the exact same mechanism used on a massive macro scale. Whether you are analyzing the structures of liberal democracies and free markets, the tenets of communism, or the unifying concepts of Pan-Africanism, normalization is the engine running in the background. It transforms these distinct, constructed ideologies into accepted, totally unquestioned realities for the people living inside them. I want you to actively engage with this for a second. Seriously, stop and think. What political ideas do you just accept as normal? Think about the policies in your own country, maybe even those intensely debated in places like Uganda right now, that you might accept without a second thought simply because they've been normalized in your specific environment. It's a real eye-opener when you sit down and think about it. Let's shift gears to Section 4, the normalization principle, a radical tool for human rights. This illustrates a massive historical pivot. The old medical model viewed people with developmental disabilities purely through the lens of sickness. They were literally treated as diseased objects who needed to be institutionalized and kept utterly dependent on health technicians. But the educational developmental model was a total game changer. It focuses on citizenship, human rights, social integration, and constant human growth. It demands that individuals be given life conditions at least as good as the average citizen. Now, this transformation didn't just happen overnight. The normalization principle gained incredible momentum around the world. Back in 1959, Denmark passed the very first legislation based on helping citizens with special needs experience life as normally as possible. Sweden jumped on board in 1967. By 1969, the revolutionary NCORE community-based model was established in Nebraska.
totally rejecting those massive, isolated institutions of the past. And in 1972, Dr. Wolfensberger published a renowned book that really cemented these concepts.
To truly make this a reality, advocates like Dr. William G. Bronston pointed out that we have to scrutinize our everyday actions, things like using a poster child to represent adults, or calling grown adults boys or girls, or transporting them in yellow school buses, failing to use their full formal names, or dressing them in childlike clothing. Bronston hit the nail on the head here. These seemingly tiny actions unconsciously dehumanize marginalized people. By ignoring their actual age, society traps these individuals in the degrading role of the eternal child.
So why did the old degrading medical model last as long as it did? Well, you have to follow the money. This incredibly powerful quote from Dr. Bronston reveals a pretty shocking truth. Institutions persisted not because they provided great care, but because of hard political and economic realities. He pointed out that the public was literally locked into decades of dehumanization, just to keep pace with the 20 to 30-year bank mortgages used to build those massive facilities in the first place.
$100,000. That was the upper end of what it cost to construct just a single institutional bed back then. Think about that. This generated enormous building contracts, huge maintenance contracts for food and drugs, and massive debt service for financial houses. It created a colossal economic machine that had a vested financial interest in keeping people segregated away from normal society.
Which brings us to Section 5, the dignity of risk, why overprotection destroys growth.
Before we dig into the mechanics of risk, just remember this punchy foundational takeaway from Bronston. Our rights are deeply interconnected in society. You simply cannot isolate dehumanization. If one group is devalued, we are literally all devalued.
True normalization requires integration, right? And with integration comes what Bronston calls the dignity of risk. Integration gives people a greater variety of experiences and the ability to actually exercise autonomy. Segregation, on the other hand, locks people in a cycle of deviancy, relying on overprotection with walls and restraints. Normalization demands that we allow people the chance to fail, to grow, and to experience life's natural challenges. You can't grow if you're locked in stagnant developmental bubble wrap.
And our final stop, Section 6, denormalizing your world, questioning your everyday reality. Here's the secret. Once you understand that norms are constructed, you realize they can absolutely be deconstructed. For the debaters and critical thinkers watching this explainer, recognizing how a norm is built is basically a superpower. You can selectively denormalize a concept in an argument to reveal the underlying assumptions that everyone else is just taking for granted. It completely changes your strategic approach to literally any debate. I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought as we wrap up today. Now that you know the invisible rulebook exists and you've seen how it can be used for both rigid control and incredible human liberation, what accepted normal rule in your own life or your own society are you going to challenge today? Keep questioning what's normal and keep learning.